Hey everyone, it's Reed. It is almost 1 o'clock in the East and it is almost 10 o'clock in the West. Special post January 6th hearing edition of Lunch with Lincoln. Our guest had to scoot, so it'll just be me and I'll just take a few minutes of your time. But just wanted to give you my sort of quick overview. The first thing is watching so many of these people from Bill Stepien to Ben Ginsburg. A guy like Stepien's my contemporary, or at least he was in Republican politics. I never worked with him, but I knew a lot of people that did. And so it's a little bit surreal to see guys that I was on a conference call with, maybe we worked on a presidential race or something together, to see them now in this position. On Ben Ginsburg, I've known Ben since I was a kid, literally. Has always been one of the finest and most upstanding guys I've known. And I probably would not be here without him, based on a lot of the help that and guidance he provided me over my career. And so the fact that he was willing to sit at that table today and do the things he did, I think was a very positive step for the nation's democracy. And I certainly appreciate him doing that. So a couple of things, going back to the idea, like Bill Stepien, Jason Miller, all these people, like, are they loathsome? Their acts are. I'm going to congratulate Stepien on having a baby, or he's going to have a baby today. I assume that they'll call him back live, but they certainly had plenty of videotape of him. But they knew that Trump had lost. They know how these things go. We all know how these things go. When it comes to these races, you have a pretty good sense of how they're going to go. And I think it was reiterated, but I want to make it clear, in the weeks leading up to Election Day in 2020, there were the things called the red wave, which then became the red mirage. The red wave was that on Election Day, because Trump had so disillusioned his voters about early voting, mail-in balloting, that the bulk of Republicans were going to show up on Election Day and cast their ballots, which meant that on Election Day, because Election Day ballots are counted as they go, it was going to look like Donald Trump was winning. But the red mirage came in when all the mail-in ballots started being counted, and those aren't counted until the polls actually closed in a given state. So what happened was Trump was up, say, 32,000 votes someplace, right? Because all his people voted on Election Day. But there were enough people that voted for Biden on Election Day that he kept it to that margin. But then the margin of mail-in ballots was significantly higher for Joe Biden. So your red wave becomes a red mirage. And that's what Trump couldn't get through his head. I'm winning on Election Day. I'm winning when the polls close. I can't understand why I'm losing now. All the other narcissism included in that statement. And so, you heard Stepien say he took Miller to the White House, before Election Day and said, Mr. President, you got to stop this with election, with mail-in balloting, with absentee voting. Guys, the Republican Party perfected the use of mail-in balloting and absentee voting because it is a much more efficient way to contact your voters. It is a much more efficient way to ensure that if Reed Galen lives at 123 Main Street and you need him to cast a ballot on your behalf, you go, Reed, have you cast your ballot? Reed, have you cast your ballot? Reed, have you cast your ballot? I say yes, they take me off the list, they move on to the next guy. So you not only increase your vote total, that the number of people have voted, so you need less people on Election Day, but your targeting of those people, the resources you expend, the time you expend, the money you spend to get those voters is much more efficient. Trump got rid of all of that for his own team. And so ironically enough, whether or not it is sending Rudy Giuliani, drunk Rudy Giuliani, inebriated Rudy Giuliani to Ukraine in 2019 to dig up dirt on Joe Biden, or going after his own mail-in voting program, Donald Trump sowed the seeds of his own election defeat, his electoral defeat, both politically and then on Election Day. So this is a guy who self-destructs, but he can't obviously take any responsibility for that. The other thing, too, is I thought that, Chris Stirewalt, previously of Fox News, very smart guy, one of the best in the business. And you could tell that, he was proud of the fact that the the whiz bang machine that they had created within Fox News's decision desk had come to a result in Arizona earlier than everybody else. Now, I think that there was an assumption, probably by me too, on election night, that Fox, would do what it could to make sure that Donald Trump was victorious. But I think what you also saw, though, was at least in that moment in time, in that evening, the hard news division of Fox News, maybe Rupert and Lachlan said, maybe we're sick of this guy, who knows? But they were going to let Stirewalt make his call, and he did. And that set off, as we saw from Kushner or Ivanka or Stepien, it set off alarm bells in the White House. For Stepien, he understood, like, if we lose Arizona, like, that means the rest of it's going down too. And so I thought Stirewalt was very impressive. And I think something that both he and Ginsburg said was about the margins on these things, guys. I mean, look, we just had a recount in a Senate race in Pennsylvania between Mehmet Oz and Dave McCormick for the U.S. Senate race there for the Republican nomination. It was a less than 1,000 vote margin. After about 5 days of the recount, McCormick said, we're not going to get there. You know why? Because in an election, 900, 1,000 votes is a lot. It's a lot. These weren't close margins, right? As Ginsburg said, this was not close. 10,000 votes in Arizona, 11,000 votes in Georgia. These were not margins. And as Stirewalt said, you're better off playing the Powerball. You're more likely to win $150 million on 6 random numbers than you were ever going to make up those numbers. And so what happened was, now let's bring in the lawyers, is the lawyers, like lawyers first and foremost, again, Drunk Rudy being a notable exception, the Kraken lady being a notable exception, John Eastman being another notable exception. The lawyers who were professionals, even as Bill Barr, as loathsome as you may think he is, and I think he is for many of his actions, understood that this was all bullshit. They knew that, like, Trump had lost, and they kept telling him that. Now, we can ask ourselves, now, why did they not come out and say that publicly? Well, I'm at best a jailhouse lawyer. Maybe there were some privilege issues. Maybe they thought, in these last days, like, some sense of some guardrails have to remain in place to ensure that, something truly awful doesn't go down. Although January 6th happened anyway. But they were all telling him that. They knew he'd lost. They knew that all of the stuff that people like Rudy and Matt Schlapp and all these other people were coming up with, as far as ballots being found in garbage cans and being backed into, stadiums or counting centers, was all BS. And you heard the U.S. attorney for the state of Georgia, or excuse me, for the Northern District of Georgia, saying, like, it wasn't happening. It was all BS. Let me say something. U.S. attorneys, like, it's their job to put bad guys in jail. It's their job to find crime and prosecute it accordingly. And if you've ever seen a U.S. attorney in action in a courtroom, they're not the kind of people you want to be up against. And so this was a guy who said, Attorney General, and he's not going to lie to his boss either, the Attorney General of the United States, like, it's not happening here, sir. And so what you see too is from Bill Barr to Mr. Pack in Georgia to Eric Hirschman, who was at the Kasowitz law firm, Trump's law firm in New York before he went to the White House, they were all like, this ain't happening. Now, remember too, that one, they knew it was false. They knew it was lies. But two, none of them want to be on the wrong side of the law. None of them want to lose their licenses. None of them want to be in league with this. Now, do I wish that more of them had said something? I do, because maybe we wouldn't be where we are. But I think what you also see is that very quickly, it was clear that Trump knew he'd lost, or Trump was being told by credible people that he'd lost. Now, you could see with Jared Kushner, he's like, it's not the way I'd go about it. But Kushner's the guy who's never going to close the door, because he's got to get back in power, right? That's what he wants. He wants to get back to the White House. $2 billion in Saudi, oil dollars isn't enough, right? Ivanka wants to be back in power. It's the only way they have to get back some semblance of, I don't know, legitimacy, if that's the word. And so you can tell that Kushner and Ivanka are very much trying to hedge their bets. I thought it was a little bit interesting, and I could be wrong about this, that Kushner, and if you read several of the books about that night, the map room was where they'd set up all the laptops and screens and everything where they could see votes coming in and getting reports. Kushner talked very much about the fact that he and the family were outside the map room and they'd go back and forth. Ivanka seemed to want to say that she was up in the residence the whole time, not paying attention. It'll be interesting to see, one, if I'm right about that, but two, if somebody brings up that discrepancy, because she clearly, like the other night, wanted to be, as distanced from what she thought, was going on, or she wants to be as distanced as she can be. And so I think that will be interesting too, because some of these folks, especially the Jared and Ivankas of the world, are trying to figure out how they balance not lying to Congress, probably not lying to federal investigators, FBI agents, or otherwise, but still being able to go to Mar-a-Lago and have dinner with Dad. And so I think that'll be interesting. I think that let's see. I thought it was interesting that whether or not it was this 2000 Mules movie, right? Which I guess Dinesh D'Souza put out about how these things all work. But I think it's interesting, guys. One thing we should never forget is that there's a whole ecosystem. This wasn't just Donald Trump. This was donors. This was conservative media, conservative activists. They were all in it to keep him in power. You get a guy like Senator Mike Lee from the state of Utah, who's desperately trying to avoid having to answer questions like this. Now, he'll say, well, I was looking for a constitutional way to keep Donald Trump, in power, or, to recertify votes or whatever. But the truth is, we should not forget this, that he pointed the likes of Sidney Powell and John Eastman to the White House, right? Did he light the match on January 6th? No, but he sure as hell, filled up the tank with gasoline and made sure that it was primed and ready. If Rudy isn't drunk and Sidney Powell isn't around and John Eastman isn't just trying to get FaceTime in the Oval Office, maybe January 6th doesn't happen. But here we are, right? There's any number of points in a disaster chain between November 3rd and January 6th, where if one thing hadn't happened, if one block had been removed, we'd be in a different place than we are today. But I think it was important that people like Ben Ginsburg and Mr. Pack got up there. I thought it was important to show Stepien and Barr and Miller, right? They don't want to go to jail for this guy, right? They don't want to go to prison for this guy. The last thing is I want to talk about, which is Mr. Schmidt from Philadelphia, who was an election commissioner there in the city, the Republican election commissioner. And when he refused to go along with the idea that there were all these ghost votes in Philadelphia, let's be clear. When Trump talks about inner city Philadelphia, he's talking about black votes. That's one. Two, that the threats of violence against Mr. Schmidt and his family came fast and furious and will probably come again today based on his testimony. There is always the threat, implied or explicit, of violence about these people, right? They will do anything they feel like they need to either retain power, attain power, keep power, whatever it is. And so I do not think that we should ever underestimate that a lot of the people you saw today are doing what they think are probably not necessarily the gentlemen at the table, but the people on video are doing what they believe is in their best interest, which is really the Trumpian way to live their lives. But that violence is always hanging around this, the others, right? All of the stuff that we see out of MAGA, right? Trying to vilify others, trying to say that, black voters caused him to lose. Everything was stolen. The problem for Trump and his ilk, and there are many candidates right now who are trying to figure out what to do because they've all got nominated or are about to be nominated based on the idea that they said 2020 was stolen. Every day that goes by, more normal Americans are watching this going, it wasn't stolen. We know it wasn't stolen. We always knew it wasn't stolen. And now these people have reminded us. So they're going to have to figure out how they talk about this, because if they say 2020 was stolen, there's plenty of evidence to the contrary now. And if they say Trump was right, then people like us are going to hold them to task for it. So I think that what we're going to see in the balance of this week is more damning testimony. But the bottom line here, folks, is that everybody in Trump's orbit, with the exception of an alcohol-addled Rudy Giuliani and an otherwise emotionally and psychologically addled Sidney Powell and a few others, knew that this was all bullshit. They knew it was all fake, all of it. They knew not one of these things, not one of these 60 lawsuits, as Ben Ginsburg noted, had the ability to go forward on procedural grounds, evidentiary grounds, standing grounds, whatever it was, because none of it existed. It was a fiction that Donald Trump and his allies created to try and maintain his power inside the White House. It did not fail. It did not succeed, and we're still dealing with it today. All right, that is my 15 minutes. Guys, be safe. Hug your families. Keep watching. Keep with us. We'll tell you what you need to know. Join us, lincolnproject.us, jointheunion.us. Make sure to tune into the rest of our streaming episodes throughout this week. We've got a couple of great guests coming up on the podcast this week. I hope that you'll download those and follow. Until next time, guys, thanks everybody, and I'll see you soon.